Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you, have you in attendance for our Bible class hour. This may surprise you, but we should be able to finish Matthew today.
What?
Yeah.
But it's Micah. I call lies. It's a bluff.
In my conclusion.
Yeah. It's a bluff.
Picking up in verse 47, this is after the statements that the chief priests, the elders have come around the cross, wagging their heads and saying, he saved others, let him save himself. If he trusted in God, then let him save him now. All of these things are following after those statements and those accusations. And that's important to remember, because what is going to happen in these verses are going to be answers to those accusations. And what we're actually finding is when it comes to accusations that are given to us or thrown at us, and we've already seen this in the life of Christ, just because somebody throws a certain accusation at you doesn't mean you have to answer in the way that they want you to. The prime example of that is back in Matthew 21 when they asked about by what authority are you doing these things? And that was casting people out of the temple. How did Jesus reply?
I'll answer you if you answer me.
Okay, and what was the question that he then posed to them?
Is John baptism from heaven or from men?
All right, John's baptism, which was it? From heaven or of men? I'm just getting it on the recorder. So right there, it's just, okay, it doesn't matter that you've thrown out this accusation. If I can tell that your accusation is insincere, I don't have to address it. I don't have to chase that rabbit. That in fact, I can go through other means in proving that your accusation is insincere and that you're just throwing this out to throw it out. The same thing is going to happen here. He saved others. Let God, or let him save himself. He trusted in God. Where is God now? Verse 47, some of them that stood there when they heard that, this in reference to, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? They said, this man calleth for Elias. Straightway, one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar, put it on a reed, and gave him to drink. The rest said, let be, let us see whether Elias will come to save him. We know from the other gospel accounts, Jesus refused this drink, and that's going to be after this, in which he gives a shout, in which he says, and that says he's going to give up the ghost. But even as we're considering what the chief priests and the elders are doing here, I've struggled in my study to pinpoint what the actual problem is with the chief priests and the elders, that they would make such a claim as this after the thing that Jesus has just said. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then the chief priests come in and they bring up this point, well, he's calling for Elias. And it's like, why would you jump to this?
The revelation?
Well, so I mean, and that's one of the things that crossed my mind, is the fact that they are misunderstanding the Old Testament prophets that, okay, Elias has already come, Elijah, and that's John the Baptist. Jesus has already answered that. And thus it's either going to be like just, clearly it's a situation of being just hard-hearted, and even with what's going to follow after, with the veil of the temple being torn in two and the graves being opened and the dead coming out, and that they are witnessing these things, seeing these things, and they're still not willing to submit and to believe. And so very well could be that this is all misdirection. Clearly, Jesus is calling forth to God, but now they're saying, well, no, he's calling for Elias. And it's like, how are you getting that interpretation? How are you even bringing this into view? And it's an attempt to just muddy up what's actually happening. Paint it with a different picture, paint it with a different tone, a different color. And then somebody runs so as to try to give some relief, but again, with the vinegar, it's going to be that same Same mixture that we had before. And the rest said, let it be, let us see whether Elias will come so as to save him. So they've shifted it from God actually being the one to save now Elias. And it's just, here they are continuously trying to persuade the people away from the things that Jesus is actually saying and actually presenting. Then verse 50. Jesus, when he had cried, again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. Now, Jesus yielded up the ghost. He gave up the ghost. So Christ, just before he expires, gave a cry with a loud voice. I've not been around too many deathbeds, but as we have it depicted to us in film and in writing and different things like that, when you have somebody on their deathbed and they're trying to get their final words out, how's that usually depicted?
Whisper.
Okay. It is a, trying with great effort, and even then you've got to lean in close to find out what's being said. But yet here is Jesus, the Son of God, speaking as a man in his full strength and giving out this shout.
And he's already spent 3 hours there suffocating to death.
Right.
So,
After having been beaten and everything like that. And here he is exclaiming with a loud voice for all to hear, to show to people that his life is not being forced from him. His life is not being taken. But just as he said, I lay down my life for the sheep. It was freely delivered by him into his Father's hands. And that as his own act and his own deed. Now, that in connection with the sun being darkened, now the veil of the temple is being ripped. And it says, in twain, from the top to bottom. Why is that an important detail?
because then you can never say somebody ripped it from the bottom. It was a force against nature.
Okay.
That could only be by some other means.
Okay. And especially when you put that in connection with how tall the veil of the temple was. So even then, just ripping from the bottom or ripping from the top, like this sheep, I could rip it from the top. But the veil is 30 feet tall. No man is coming in and doing that.
Without scaffold.
Yeah, exactly. Without some type of attachment or some type of ladder. The sun is darkened. The veil has been rent from the top to the bottom. The earth did quake and the rocks were rent. And you connect that back to their accusation. He trusted in God. Let him save him now. All of this is an answer to that accusation. All of this is a showing of, yeah, he does trust in me. And here's the evidence that I'm still there. Tearing the veil, darkening the sun, rending the rocks, removing this separation between God and man. That's what that veil was there for. It separated the holy place from the most holy place. Any priest could go into the holy place, but only the chief priest could go into the most holy place, and that one time a year. And now that separation is gone because of what is happening here. The sacrifice being made so that all will be able to come before God. Matthew Henry, in his, I don't believe this is his concise commentary, but this is his, no, this is going to be his concise commentary. He's got two. One that's concise and one that's just looking at the entire Bible, kind of like in an overview. But Matthew Henry in his commentary brings this into our remembrance of what's transpiring at this event. Between the 3rd and the 6th hour, that is between 9 and 12 o'clock, as we reckon, he was nailed to the cross, and soon after the 9th hour, that is between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he died. That was the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, and the time when the Paschal Lamb was killed, and Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us, and offered himself in the evening of the world as sacrifice to God of a sweet-smelling savor. None of this is happening by coincidence. That as John's record of the gospel is given, John chapter 1, and that in 2 separate occasions, John the Baptizer saw Jesus coming, and both times, what did he say about Jesus? Behold the Lamb of God. That in the beginning of John's record, that is the view of the Messiah. A lamb. What do you do with a lamb? You sacrifice. And then coming to this point and this time of day, and just think about what everybody, so that really is a sad thing about all of this. At this time of the day, all of Israel should have been busy and focused on the evening sacrifice. But instead, where's their attention?
Crucify him.
Crucify him. Crucify him. And then you take it beyond that, of what is now happening before their very eyes, and it's just like, man, here we are at this hour, and this man's being put to death, and he's the Lamb of God. And how just being moved by the mob, moved by the influence of others, and then the envy and the indignation of the chief elders and the high priest, or the elders and the chief priest. And then all of this just not coming into view for what's happening. And then for them earlier in the hall of Pilate to say, let his blood be upon us and our children. And it's just like, you have no idea how true a statement you just made. Because after this, and in realizing who he is, what is it that you're going to be wanting? You are going to want to be washed in his blood. It's just crazy to take all of that in consideration of what they're saying. And because of the, like we said, just because their hatred, they're missing what they're saying. But then none of this stopped the plan and the progress that was needing to be made on man's behalf. So any thoughts, questions, comments on that connection before we move on to the next?
I just have a little thing, which you're probably going to hit on, final. It's just that they're not focusing on the sacrifice, but yet they're about to say, oh man,
Right.
we need to break their feet and get
Yeah.
them dead because
Yeah.
we need to go do the Passover.
Right.
Just the hypocrite. Like, they don't mean it.
Yep.
It's only ritual for them.
Yeah, the inconsistency. So with, okay. Bring all that into view. What is a regulation of God's law, the Passover specifically, since we're in this time frame, the week of unleavened bread? What happens when you are involved with a dead body?
Unclean.
You're unclean, which means you're not able to go and observe this. Now, granted, they've kept themselves away and they've not touched anything that belongs to this dead body physically, but what about internally?
They're rotten to the core.
Just as Jesus said, you are whited sepulchres full of dead men's bones. You are unclean on the inside. But as Jordan said, you're still going to rush, and it's like, oh, well, we got to make it to church. You just killed a man. And you honestly want to play this game that you're worried about this. You're really not. So yeah, good point. Verse 52. The graves were open. Many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the grave after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. With this section, Matthew, in his recording of this by inspiration, skips ahead to after his resurrection. Then the question arises, what happened to these that rose from the dead? I don't know. Because I'm only told about them coming out. I don't know what happens after that. The Scripture doesn't tell us. Now, I can give some possibilities based upon some other things that have happened similar in the Bible. For example, if this is a raising like that of Samuel in the Old Testament, somebody who has been dead for a long while, or even for that matter, Moses and Elijah in Matthew 17, and how that they are brought forth on the Mount of Transfiguration. If it is like that, then these individuals would return to Abraham's bosom. But it's also the possibility that these individuals have not been in the grave all that long, and that like Lazarus, and that Lazarus was raised up physically. And in that form, they would go back into Jerusalem, they would live, and they would die again. Those are some possibilities, but that's as far as I can go. But even with that, and that usually being the question that comes up, is that the reason why we have this happening? What would be the reason?
To believe in the resurrection.
To believe in the resurrection.
God is in control.
All right, God is in control.
Power over life and death.
All right, power over life and death. But as we said, these events are tying back into an accusation.
Oh.
Trust in God.
He trusted in God.
God's still there.
God's still here.
Because it goes back to all the other things that just happened.
That's right.
Tearing.
That's right. So even with this, to where the chief priests, elders, Pharisees, and Sadducees could end up saying about the resurrection of Jesus, well, that was one man. That was a fluke. How do you answer this? That it wasn't just Jesus at this time, but that you end up having these individuals at the same, or not at the same time, but at some point after the resurrection, and they go into Jerusalem. They are appearing before many. You can't explain that away, no matter how hard you're going to try. And we know the Jews are going to try really hard to try to explain this stuff away. There's just too much evidence to lay this to the side and that this was not the working of God. Something spinning?
Jesus didn't show himself to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, did they show themselves to all of Jerusalem, or was it only to encourage the saints, like the apostles, like Jesus is only seen by the 500 and the, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's all that's going through my mind. But there's nothing we can really answer. Like, are the Pharisees and the chief priests, are they seeing them too?
Oh, I'm sure. Like,
It says
again,
appeared to many.
right, again, this is going to, and think about the time frame in which this is.
The beginning of the church.
Well, beginning of the church, but also this is Passover. And you have millions of Jews that are in Jerusalem at this time. Word is going to spread.
Weren't you dead?
Yeah. And that, even with Peter and what he's going to preach on the day of Pentecost, and how it is that with many wondrous signs and miracles, Jesus is confirmed as being the Son of God. That's not just by the miracles that Jesus performed himself. That's also going to be the things that were centered around his crucifixion. Darkening of the sun, tearing of the veil, earthquake, rending of the rocks, and then this. God is going above and beyond to make sure that people are getting the message. Now, with that point, what does that say about how badly God wants to make sure that people know his truth?
Very much big time so.
That he would go so far to do, so even right here, to do the very thing that the rich man was requesting. I have 5 brothers. Send back Lazarus to warn them. And the response was to him, if they're not, they have Moses and the prophets, if they're not going to hear them, then no man coming from the dead is going to convince them. Well, even with that being so, seriously?
They're
Even with that being so, God still puts forth the effort.
Now, would that be because they just have hard hearts?
Yeah.
And these people have the mindset of listening to dead people?
Right. And even with that, so you take, for example, the Sadducees. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection. There is no coming back from the dead. And yet we know, even after all of this transpired, the Sadducees are still around. Yeah, there are some people there just that hard-hearted. Been in it for so long, made all the arguments that they can make, defended it tooth and nail. They're just not going to give it up. But even then, is what's taking place here isn't necessarily for them. See, we get fixated on those people, but what's being done is not for them.
It's encouragement for the saints moving forward.
All right, edification for God's people, the women that are following, the apostles and the struggles that they're having, the 500 that are going to see the resurrected Christ. All of this is for them. Be encouraged. Be strengthened. Be edified. That what is coming is coming. But it's also for those that are out in the world, those that are lost in sin, but specifically the Sauls of the world. But okay, he's doing some bad stuff, but he's struggling with what he's doing. He is seeing the evidence and he's kicking against it. But then finally he just can't kick anymore. That he ends up learning his lesson. All right. Some good thoughts there, good comments there. Anything else? All right, 54. Now when the centurion and they that were with him watching Jesus saw the earthquake and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. So here's our point that we've been building. Why these things are happening. Saw him, viewed those things that were done, and notice what he says. Truly this was the Son of God. And many women were there, beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him. among which was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's children. So just as we said, bringing up those other points, and especially that of the people being raised from the grave, well, what happened to those people? Here's the reason. It's a witness. To be able to see those things which were done, and then to come to this conclusion. That's the why. Now look at this centurion. Saw those things, feared greatly, and then he says this, truly this was the Son of God. So he has these signs, and should be pretty clear that he has the faith that Jesus is the Son of God, believes that. He's even willing to make some form of confession. I don't know if this is just in his head, but it says that he says it, that truly this was the Son of God. So is he saved like the thief?
No.
Okay. That would be my answer. No. But why?
Because it doesn't say he was.
Okay.
There's no proof evidence.
There is no admission from Scripture that this man walked away justified. And that's what you would need. And that's what we have with all the other illustrations. Paralytic man, Matthew 9. How do we know his sins were forgiven? Without baptism, without sacrifice. Because it says it. Jesus pronounced it. The woman with the issue of blood. How do we know that her sins were forgiven?
Because Jesus says it.
Jesus said it. The thief on the cross. How do we know his sins were forgiven?
Because the Baptists say it.
Jesus is alive. Jesus is God. He pardons. This centurion could walk away from this and say all day long, well, I feel as though I'm justified. That doesn't make a difference. Pardon does not come by feeling. Pardon comes by announcement. And there's nobody here at this point on earth to announce for this man, you're justified. You're cleansed. And that's the key to all of it. That it's just like, so you take this individual and you put it into another frame, another illustration that we used in the past, that you have some prisoner that's in jail, and he just wakes up one day and decides, you know what, I've been pardoned. Let me out. And the corrections officer is going to look at him like he's crazy. What are you talking about? Nothing's come from the judge to say that you've been pardoned. Well, I know that, but I feel like it. Well, you can feel like it and stay in your jail cell, because you're not going anywhere without the actual pardon. And that's the element that everybody's missing when they start going. It's amazing to me that we spend so much time focused on the thief on the cross and then nothing gets brought up about the centurion. But if it's good for the thief on the cross, then it should be good for this person, but everybody's going to recognize, like, well, no, just because of that doesn't make it so. And it's because of that missing element. God hasn't said it. But then we get into the New Testament system, and though we have no audible voice for God to say, okay, you're pardoned, you're pardoned, you're pardoned, what do we have to know that pardon has been given?
I was writing something down. Say that all over again.
Even though today We do not have an audible voice like Jesus on the cross to say, okay, I've forgiven you. How do we know when people are forgiven today?
Because the word.
When you
Right
do
here.
what the judge says. Now, I know this firsthand because I've gone through a trial to where I've had to have a judge say to me, okay, you stay out of trouble for a year, the charges will be dropped. Now, I can walk out of that courtroom saying all day long, I've been pardoned, but have I?
Until that year.
No, not until that year is up, and then I go back before the judge and he says, you're pardoned. And everybody recognizes that on our physical, legal standpoint. And it's like, well, hey, you got to honor what the judge says. But then they treat God lesser than our physical courts. The judge has already said, you do this, you do this, you do this, I'll wipe your slate clean. And then people want to walk around as though their slate's clean before they do what the judge says. It's wild. That's how people behave on an everyday basis. Now, that's just a little side point. As I was looking at this and just pondering over it. So anything else on that line before we move on to the women? Getting back into the context. Okay. So then it says, many women were there beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him. While the men run off and hide. Now we know from John's account, John is still here. But while the men, most of the men are standing afar off, here are the women standing by. Here they are, close to the Messiah in his time of trial, in his time of struggle. And they are in the business of doing for him what they've been doing all of this time. Ministering. And that while we move on into the New Testament, and a lot of focus ends up being put on the apostles, and rightfully so. But the last thing we're needing to do is to forget how much the cause of Christ has been moved forward because of good-hearted women. And being willing to minister. Not being influenced by the mob, not being influenced by the crowd, not even being influenced by the apostles. With their fear that they are in. But moving forward to be here with the Messiah. It says a lot. And that it's something that women, sisters, when you read this type of information in the text, then you're not needing to get discouraged by the fact that you're not able to stand up and teach like this. Because that's not the end-all, be-all of Christianity. The apostles were involved in a lot of public teaching. But then here's Jesus in his moment of turmoil. What does he need? He doesn't need a public teacher. He needs somebody that's just going to stand by. Be close. Kind of like Job's friends. They started out really good. And that when they heard about the trouble that Job was in, they traveled great distances and they sat with him for 7 days. And if they just kept their mouths shut,
We wouldn't have a book.
well, we wouldn't have a book, but man, it just, then yeah, like all we would have is the good to say about them. It's like, man, that's the kind of friends you need. There's nothing you can say. There's nothing you can really do. We're just going to come sit with you. And sometimes that's all people really need. And we have that being pictured here. But then we move forward in 57. When the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple. He went to Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered, and when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own tomb, or new tomb, which he had hewn out in the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre and departed. And there was Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, sitting over against the sepulchre. He begged for the body. That's the Greek word ahiteo. To beg, call for, to crave. Desire greatly. And just picture those words playing out in this scene. Here is this man, and he is before Pilate, and he is begging for the body. Well, why? He's already dead. Doesn't matter. I want the body. Well, why? Because I'm going to minister. He doesn't have a place to be buried. I'm going to give him one. Not only am I going to give him a place to be buried, but that I'm going to wrap him up in clean linen and anoint him with oils. He's already dead. Doesn't matter. I'm doing this for him. And is that our attitude when it comes to knowing and being like Christ? That is, we as people that are supposed to be following in his footsteps, do we desire Jesus with this same type of urgent craving? Many today don't. It's not an urgent craving, it's more like a casual relationship. I'll see you when I see you. Okay, I've been here this week, I'll catch you next week. That's not how we should be. But that's the mentality that people have, and they think they'll be able to get by with it. No, no, no. We need to have this. But not only that, here's Joseph of Arimathea, and he's doing this good work. And look who we have still following. Here again are the women, sitting close by. Notice, there's no conversation of, well, okay, Joseph's got this handled. We're just going to go on about our business. It didn't matter that somebody else was doing it. They still wanted to be involved. And that when it comes to work that's done inside of the church, a lot of the times that first conversation is what takes place. A lot of people are willing to excuse themselves from being involved in something because, oh, well, somebody's already got that covered. That doesn't matter. Joseph is going to the tomb. Okay, we don't have to go to the tomb. No, you can go to the tomb also. Joseph is wrapping the body. He's anointing the body. Then, okay, we'll let him do that. No, you can do that too. Just because somebody else is doing a thing does not mean that you cannot do it also. Well, I don't want it to be like I'm copying them. Like all these different excuses that pop into our head. It's like, how childish. This is the Son of God, the Savior of the world. You want to do something good for Him? Do something good for Him. And the same thing applies to doing good to anybody else. Well, here's this person that has a need. Well, Mike and Christine are already on it. I'm not going to do anything. No, you can do something too. And we see that being played out right here. And not only right here, but as we move into chapter 28. Joseph has already got this covered. And in chapter 28, we find these women going back to the tomb. Why were they going back to the tomb?
Because in the upper room, they were probably listening. Well, not in the upper room, but they were listening, and could it be possible that they remembered his words that he, was going to be raised up?
That's right.
They're looking forward.
That's right. 3 days he's coming. So what do we need to do with his body? Take care of it. And we're not needing to just sit back and just let somebody else handle it. Because if enough people have that mentality, then what's going to happen?
Nobody's going to take care
Nobody's going to handle it. So just jump in there and do it. Joseph's already anointed the body. The women are going to come right back the next day and they're going to do it all over again. What's already been done? Why are you doing that? It needs to be done. We want to do it. Let us do it. And just be involved. Then verse 62, chapter 27. Now the next day that followed, the day of the preparation, the chief priests, the Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure unto the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say unto the people, He is risen from the dead, so the last error shall be worse than the first. Pilate said unto them, Ye have a watch. Go your way, make it as sure as you can. So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting a watch. Here the chief priests continue to scheme and connive, and their plan ends up shooting them in the foot. And this is what happens when a person is being moved by this kind of motivation. Envy, anger, hatred, indignation. You do not think clearly. In this situation, what would have been the best thing for the chief priests, Pharisees to do right here?
Shut up.
Just shut up. You're afraid that this is going to happen? Steal him away in the middle of the night? Well, then the last thing we need to do is end up putting these precautions to make it impossible for them to do it. And then what excuse do you have when it actually happens? You don't have any excuse. It would have been much better for them to left it alone, no guard, unkept, unsure, so that when this happens, what could they throw out there as an accusation? Oh, they came away and stole him. But you see, you're thinking you're getting ahead of the situation, and you're just making it better for the other side. This is the worst thing they could have ever done. Because it just further proves the point. Okay, now you're making it undeniable that what actually happened. That even with this, even the best laid out plans of the wicked and the evil, it's never going to work. If that was actually what you're wanting to spin, then it would have been better to leave the tomb unguarded. But once you put the guard there, it's impossible to say that they stole him. But we know that they still try to make this same claim today. I think it's Matthew that actually ends up telling us that. So it's going to be in 28. But now this is what cowards do. People that deceive always have a spin. No. Here's what really happened. And they do that in 28. They pay the guards. Here's the story that you tell. So on and so forth. We've got that going on today. You watch anything with Dr. Fauci today, and it's completely backwards from what he said 2 years ago. He is literally saying today, oh, no, I never recommended anybody wear masks. I never recommended anybody shut down, close everything down. Spin, baby. We remember. I am the science. Yeah, that's who you were 2 years ago. It just never ends with these folks. To where you reach the point, just stop listening to them. And you just simply start asking questions, and the story falls apart. Now, they go through all of that, and then we come to 28. The end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary, Magdalene, the other Mary, to see the sepulchre. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. His countenance was like lightning, his raiment white as snow, and for fear of him the keepers did shake and became as dead men. And the angel answered and said unto the women, Fear not ye, for I know that ye seek Jesus, which was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen. As he said, come, see the place where the Lord lay. Mark 16, verse 1, we're told, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. Are you going to use any of that stuff that we talked about? Okay. When we think about, again, them coming to try and do this, and just how powerful persuasion and having the proper mindset can be, there were a lot of things to stand in the way of these women not showing up at the tomb on this day. There were plenty of reasons for them to look at the circumstances and say, you know what? We just don't need to do this. Just think about it. What was standing in their way?
The guards.
Here are the Jews, and they've set guards in front of the tomb.
Well, they could have been arrested for...
Just not let in, because here are these men, and they send the women out to do the dirty work, as though we wouldn't suspect them. Oh, we're just here to anoint the body. And then bam, the body's gone.
He's risen.
Suspicion, likely to be arrested, showing up at the tomb like that. That didn't stop them. What else?
The mob that just crucified
All right.
Jesus.
So even before you get out to the tomb to where the guard is, you got a whole mob inside of the city giving you dirty looks. There go those women following after Jesus.
They speak Galilean.
That didn't stop them. What else?
Well, there's Pilate, there's, I mean,
Okay, Pilate, Herod, just go up the chain. What else? You can't answer. One of the records tells us of one of the things they were worried about.
Only thing I can think of, I can't think of anything, but if you're going to follow after Christ, why not put you to death as well?
Okay, that's going to be wrapped up in the other stuff, though. That the mob could turn on them and decide to kill them. It's pictured on the screen.
they could be crucified.
What's that thing right there?
Older,
There's a large stone in front of the tomb. And that even in the other gospel accounts, gospel records, it tells us they had that conversation. Once we get there, who's going to roll the stone back? Figure it out when we get there. We're still going. Nothing was going to stop them. And these are some pretty big things. Now, what kind of things do we let stop us? And even then, some possible imaginary things. These were all real hurdles they had to get over. They weren't going to be stopped. We need to have the same type of persuasion and zeal that these women had. Here's a good thing. We know that He's going to raise again. We have got to take care of the body. We are going, no matter what tries to stop us. And even with all of these real things that could have stopped them, did anything stop them? No.
An angel opened the door for them.
Exactly. Here we have God making the provisions, just as He did with Jesus in the Passover. They had no place to keep it, but all that was ready. We know something that we need to do. Step out and do it. And that we have this being pictured before us, and we're just thinking about the scale of what's been done for us and then what is being done in return. The motivation behind what they're doing. The first and great commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. And that the second is like unto it, that it grows out of that, that you then love your neighbor as yourself. God has already shown His love for man in His Son dying on the cross. Now here they are reciprocating, returning that love in knowing, Romans 5:12, wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. That's why this is happening. And that with Hebrews 2:14 and 15, for as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, He also Himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. That now that fear is being taken away. That is what he had done for them. That's what he has done for us. So how should we live? We should live just like Romans 8 says. For there is now no condemnation to them that walk after the Spirit. That's what creates this can-do attitude. They didn't have to fear the Roman soldiers. They didn't have to fear the mob. They didn't have to fear Pilate, Herod, anybody else. And hadn't Jesus already taught them that? Matthew chapter 10. Fear not them which are able to kill the body, destroy the body. But who are you supposed to fear instead?
The one that can destroy the soul and the body.
That's the one you should be afraid of. And so these women are operating not without fear, beyond fear. Fear is still there. Jesus was afraid. But fear is not to overrule us and to overpower us. Verse 7 of chapter 28, they are told, "Go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and behold, he goeth before you into Galilee. There shall ye see him. Lo, I have told you." And they departed quickly from the sepulchre. Notice, here's our topic, with fear. And just for your notes, that is the word phobos. Alarm, fright. And that's understandable. Just look at what's happening here. Yeah, I'd be scared out of my mind too. But they're not simply just departing the sepulchre with fear and great joy. And there you have the overpowering element of fear. And it even seems contrary to think that these two emotions could end up going together. How do you have fear and joy at the same time? Because you have hope. You have hope and you have trust and confidence in the message. And the evidence is, I want to say right there, but the body's gone. That is the evidence. Yeah, and an angel telling you. And they did run to bring his disciples word. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, "All hail." And they came and held him by the feet, and they worshipped him. That's important because you have some that would try to make the claim that Jesus is in fact not deity and that he was as a man or even as an angel. But you don't worship men like this. You don't worship angels like what these women are doing. Then said Jesus unto them, "Be not afraid. Go tell my brethren that they go into Galilee, and there shall they see me." Verse 11, now when they were going, behold, some of the watch came into the city and showed unto the chief priest all the things that were done. Here's this overwhelming evidence. You would think with this kind of report, there's no denying what happened and that these men just have to convert. When they were assembled with the elders and had taken counsel, they gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, say ye, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. And if this come to the governor's ears, we will persuade him and secure you. This is the danger of a hard-hearted, hard-headed person. They just will not give up. They had done so much to lie against Jesus already. They've got too much skin in the game to give up now, to go back on it. They had dug such a deep hole for themselves that the shame would be too great for them to walk back what they had said and what they did. And that they would go on denying exactly who Jesus claims that He is. He is the Son of God, so they took the money and did as they were taught, and this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day. They're still making this claim. How in the world can you? Everybody knows about the empty tomb. The evidence is overwhelming. It's substantial. It's beyond the shadow of a doubt. It's against you. And they still will not submit. That's a terrifying thing. To know that as we're reading about these people here, but that there's still people like this today. That they will readily set aside the evidence, counsel themselves together, be involved in bribery, go through all of this trouble to keep up the story. When it would be so much easier just to say, okay, we lost. We were wrong. And we yield. And that it is the case that some people would rather die than have to admit something like this. But as you study the Israelites in the Old Testament, this is a continuous problem that they had. Pride, haughtiness of heart, spirit, mind. And that it's just, we can't let go of what we have. They had position, they had power, they had influence. And they would rather lose their souls than give that up. And that's the thing. You can go on believing that you've got the power and that you've got the influence, but if you don't have anybody following you, you're just out on a walk. It is in the book. But this same type of attitude plays out in front of us every day when we try to present to our religious friends what Jesus says about being saved. What do I have to do so as to be pardoned? Well, Jesus says, believe and be baptized, shall be saved. Well, no. I've been brought up in a system my entire life that teaches otherwise. I've already bought into this other system. I can't do that. Well, you're going to end up being just like these folks right here. But even as we pull this back to our own application, here we are dealing with Israelites, people of God that were in covenant with Him. And they had gotten so built up in their own minds about their own way of doing things. And then when the way of escape, the off-ramp is given to them, they don't take it. So it's kind of like the same, you hear this being said a whole lot when it comes to this Ukraine-Russia conflict. And that's like, okay, you need to give Russia an off-ramp. You need to give them a way to be able to get out of this. Otherwise, all you're going to be doing is pushing them further into more conflict. But then what happens when they don't take the off-ramp that you give them? Here's your off-ramp. Here's your way that you can exit and get out of this. And they keep passing the exits to where you're finally here. And at this point, they're never going to get off. That's their own doing. The way to get out was made. Just didn't take it. All right, 16 and 20. Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. And when they saw Him, they worshipped Him. But some doubted. So here we are at this point, and they're still struggling. Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, and baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. Here they are at this stage, and they are about to be sent out as His witnesses to carry out the gospel. And they're still struggling with doubt. Read the other accounts, Mark, Luke, and even into Acts chapter 1, we find out what some of their conversation is about. And how does Jesus handle it? Jesus came and spake unto them. Here He is about to ascend into heaven, and He's still teaching. Luke 24, we're told that He enlightened their understanding. But that as He comes to the close of this letter, or not this letter, but this gospel account, there's really something about a book ending the way that it begins. That in Jesus saying to His apostles, and lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world. And then in Matthew chapter 1:23, we're being told, at His birth, behold, a virgin shall be with child, shall bring forth a son, and they shall call His name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is, God with us. And again, you tack this on to the discussion that we had in Matthew 27:46 about the Father turning His back on the Son on the cross. If that's what happened, then what confidence could the apostles have here? Well, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world, unless you end up doing something that causes me to turn my back on you. Doesn't mesh. That is, here they are doubting, And then you just picture yourself, put yourself here in one of the position of the apostles, and all of this weight is now being put on you. Think about how it was before. Okay, yeah, we're confident, we're zealous, we're ready to go. Why?
Because Jesus was in charge.
Jesus is here. And He's got us by the hand. To where Peter, okay, Peter, you mess up, who can come clean up your mess? Jesus can. But now He's about to go away. And reality sets in. Oh no. And that fear comes in. What are we going to do? And that Jesus then says to them, you go and teach, you make disciples. From John's account, 14, 15, 16, I'm going to send you a comforter that's going to lead you, going to guide you into all truth. Don't fear. Don't be anxious. Remember that, Matthew 6? Be careful for nothing. I am with you always. And that's what God was illustrating from the very beginning. God with us. To where we can read Hebrews 13, 5 and 6. That while in this context, Matthew 28, this is being specifically said to the apostles, and that in connection with the end of the world, end of the age, and their miraculous ability in being able to go out and teach and to preach. Where we come into play is Hebrews 13. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have, for He has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. And that's what a good leader does. This is what a good king is involved in doing. He does not leave his citizens defenseless. This is what a shepherd does on a daily basis. He tends to the flock. And then now, as we are able to go out and be involved in the work that Christ has done for us, or excuse me, that we're supposed to do for Christ, and even as we've mentioned throughout most of our Matthew study, there were points in our study where I brought up that this can feel extremely overbearing of what we're being called to do, what it is that God expects of us, how we're supposed to think, how we're supposed to live, how we're supposed to act. And then that doubt starts creeping in of, how are we ever supposed to get this done? He's not left us. He will never leave us nor forsake us. That as we have His teachings, that we have His Word, we have His life laid out before us, and we have the opportunity to go through it as we've done. He is our helper. But then that becomes a key part of it, is that you've got to be able to take help. It's one thing to say to say, like, to yourself, yeah, I need help. Well, okay, let me help you. No, I'm not going to. You're not going to make it. And that in realizing the full picture, that this is why Jesus came, was to give help. Okay, I need help. Here's the help. Just say thank you and take it. So when we're thinking about this Matthew study and what's being presented in Matthew ties over into the other gospel accounts as well, that they're all connected, intertwined, giving different angles and different views of things that are transpiring. All of this information is part of the conversion process. Many times we get stuck on baptism in that, oh, that's when a person is converted. No, 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 no. Conversion takes place when they're being taught. And they're now recognizing there's things I'm going to have to change. That death, burial that's taking place in Romans chapter 6 has to first come with the mental realization beforehand. This is what I mean to do. The old man is dying. A new man is coming up. And I'll close the way that I started by saying this is one of my favorite studies. Because there's everything's in depth with what the epistles give an overview. Like we said about Romans 6, becoming a new creature. You want to find out what all that's about? Study Matthew. The things that are talked about in Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, mortifying these members, putting to death these things of the flesh. You want to know what that's really about? You find that information in the application of Matthew. And that if we will take these things and let them sink into our ears and make the application, work on these things, start applying them, start putting them to use, not only will we start seeing changes, but as we start teaching them to others, we'll start seeing changes all around us. So anything else as we close out Matthew? I know you thought I was never coming, but
It's sad.
It's sad.
Just what you're saying about the fear and talking about Joseph in John's account. It says that he was a disciple in secret because he was afraid. So it just shows his growth.
yeah.
Now first he's afraid, but then he's coming and begging for the body of Jesus.
Yep. And not only is Joseph there, but who also is there? Nicodemus,
Came by night.
the guy that came by night. And you can see his development, his growth throughout the gospel account of John, that he actually ends up standing up for Jesus in the middle of Jesus' work. They have a council, and they're trying to figure out what to do, and Nicodemus rises up and says, are we supposed to condemn a man before we hear him? And the Pharisees turn on him quick, fast, in a hurry. Oh, are you one of his disciples? And that kind of, that hit him. And he shrunk back. But then there he is at the end, ready to be involved in the burial. So yeah, good point. Okay, stop.